when you have lost yourself, you are most yourself. And this is the state I believe we need to earnestly attempt to be in as often as possible. The state of being completely immersed in the present moment, the state of not being aware of the ego, of your pride, of the earthly and fleshly concerns that you have. You are truly yourself when you are, you're not thinking about, getting food because you're hungry. You're not thinking about how one may perceive your appearance at this moment, how essentially any ego egotistical thought or bodily bodily awareness of sensation. When you are in that state, you are not truly yourself. And especially when you are worried about the will of your ego, the will of your pride, and you don't lose yourself in yourself. You don't let what comes out come out. You are not in a flow state. To me, that is what the flow state is. It's when when people go into a flow state, and flow has been researched, but we still don't really know what it is or how to get into it. And but it's an out of body experience. You're not aware of your movements. You're really not even thinking about the meticulous movements that you are making. They're just happening almost autonomously. It's autonomous movement without thought, and that is from surrendering yourself over to yourself, over to God, over to the will of the universe, the will of the divine. And in doing so, you the truth yourself actively flows out of you into, it's almost like a state of ecstasy. And that is often my goal in my videos. You know, I often lose myself in videos. I often don't know where the video is leading. I often don't know the next thing I'm going to say. I just open my mouth and speak, and words come out, and I trust, the still small voice, the Holy Spirit, the divine, to guide my words, to hopefully land on the listeners that it has been given to, that it has been brought to. And I find when occasionally I'll rewatch one of my videos, and I'll say things in a certain way, at a certain pace, with a certain nature that I could not replicate if I attempted to replicate it. But it comes so naturally and so easily when I just allow myself to flow in that state, to drop the ego, to drop the pride of what one may think about what I say. That is when I make the worst videos. That is when I am the worst version of myself, when I'm worrying about what I'm about to say, how it will land. I'm worrying about, my ego, worrying about if it'll obscure people's opinions of myself if I say something that degrades my present self or my past self. Will my approval in their eyes be lessened for things that I have done, for things that I am willing to admit, for faults that I have, for difficulties that I deal with? And when you're in that state, you're in a state of willful blindness, of not wanting to accept the truth of who you are, accept the truth of what you are, accept the truth that the truth will set you free. And the awareness of it is more important than the awareness of it is infinitely better than the denial of it. And to truly find ourselves, I believe we do have to lose ourselves in the ecstasy of the present moment, of the flow state of the divine. And you can't do this worrying about what other people think. You can't do this worrying about the consequences of your actions. Yes, to a certain degree, you need those things. But if you let yourself be completely, if you truly gave in to a full evaluation of your dreams and of your goals, you would be paralyzed. You would not be able to, you wouldn't be able to make a move because there'd be too much uncertainty. There'd be too much, even if you were, even if you were completely humble, you would, you would come to the conclusion that you're not worthy of attempting this task. And I don't think, to a certain degree, that is what humility is, in a sense. But to a certain degree, too much analysis is paralysis. And sometimes you just got to go for it. You just got to trust the flow state, the autonomous movements and the autonomous thoughts and the autonomous language that you use in the present moment, and put your will in the divine will. Allow yourself to be guided by the still small voice and become your true self. Without your true self is you without your ego, you without your pride, you without your vices. That is your true self. That is you completely immersed in the moment. When we are completely our true selves, we have no bodily awareness. We just move. The body just goes. We really have no recollection of thought either. And I think that is when we're most aligned with the divine will. And I think that is with, as the Bible says, I believe it says, it's better to be empty. It's I don't know exactly the verbiage, but I think the premise of the point is it's better to be empty because then you can be filled anew. And I definitely have read theologians and mystics. I definitely have read Meister Eckhart speak on the goal of becoming empty, because nothing, God will not enter anything that is not empty. Meister Eckhart speaks on that at length in his book. Well, I guess I just have a book called the Selected Writings, Penguin Classic, but he speaks on that at length. A very good book also. You should definitely read it, especially if you're into Christianity and theology and mysticism. But yeah, he speaks at length about how God will not enter you if you are not empty. If there is any of your being in you, he will not enter you. And if you completely empty yourself, he has no choice but to enter what is empty. And Meister Eckhart's a mystic, so I don't know how that stands to, Christian doctrine in, the Orthodox or the Catholic Church. But I believe he was a Catholic, so I think and he is one of the most famous mystics, so there is something to be had, I believe. And to me, I see it myself. It is better to be empty. I feel like when you do empty yourself, when you drop the ego, when you drop the pride, something comes to help you out. Whether that's God or your true self, or you're just in a state where you're more spiritual because you've dropped all earthly concerns and you're able to interact with the divine, and you're able to take out the inspiration that is within you, that is your soul, that is yourself, and be able to fully emphasize it. And I think if we want to pursue anything worthwhile, these are the states we have to get into, of deep focus, of earnest effort, and earnest attention to the task at hand, and lose ourselves in it. That is why when I when I study, when I read, when I do many things that I want to be very focused, I put noise canceling headphones in and I play white noise. So I will not be distracted by any outside noise. I will not let the sound of a car take me out of the moment. I won't let the sound of anything take me out of the moment. Even beautiful things like the song of a bird, or, you know, the wind. I mean, even those things are an enemy to deep work because they're earthly. They're the enemy to your true self. because they bring you back in to yourself, your fake self, your earthly existence. The wind, the breeze may make you cold, and you'll remember that you have a jacket inside that you could go grab, and then, oh, but if the breeze calms down, you'll probably be too hot, and then you'll be uncomfortable. And these are just not states. That deep losing oneself, they just don't happen. They don't happen in those states. Deep work does not happen. And the ego is too strong for you to interact with the divine and to let what is seeking expression inside of you come out. And trust that what is trying to come out of you is the right time to come out of you. It is the right time for it to land, and the world needs it, and that's why you are being inspired to share it. I've heard, I think it's like Rick Rubin potentially talk about how, or oh no, it's either Rick Rubin or Stephen Pressfield, the two probably guys at the top of the mountain on the creativity pursuit, with Rick Rubin's book The Creative Act and Stephen Pressfield's book The War of Art. And one of them says how, I think it's Stephen Pressfield, talks about how if you have an idea to do something, you have something inside of you seeking expression to be brought into the world, and you don't do it, the divinity leaves you. The idea goes to another who will potentially bring it into existence, and it doesn't stay with you. It doesn't. It's like Rick Rubin talks about ideas and creativity being like a cloud that you can look up at a cloud, and if you draw it right then and there, and I mean you're a good drawer, you'll capture the cloud. And if you say, oh, in like 2 hours, I'll I'll remember that cloud, and then I'll write it down. Then I'll pursue the idea. It's gone. You won't be able to recreate the cloud. You won't be able to remember it. And if you somehow remember subtle details, you won't remember it in its full entirety, which is the full richness of the idea, and the full emptying of oneself, because you'll be too consciously aware trying to remember the thing. And I, I guess I'm getting into a realm of the creative pursuit and bringing things into the world, but I think this is also deeply important for the internal pursuit of knowing oneself and coming to have a better relationship with oneself and with God, and with letting what is seeking expression inside of you out. Being in that moment of when things arise, immersing yourself inside of them, because they arise for a reason, and they should be delved into. They should not be looked at superficially, because they are not superficial. I mean, yes, every thought is not, you are not your thoughts. Every thought is not, a groundbreaking revelation that you need to spend hours digging into. But I think so often we know the ones that potentially may be. The still small voice does not lie to us. The thing that comes up time and time again when we think about that thing, that is the thing that we need to delve into. That is the thing that will bring us closer to ourself, give us a deeper and richer understanding of this life that we are living, with this soul that we are given. But as Meister Eckhart says, I think it's best to empty ourselves so God can come in. And I think in that we truly find ourselves. We truly find the will that we want to will, not the will that the ego wants, that we so often regret in the future, and we so often don't even understand how we thought in that, that type of way. And you see a thing like seeing if my microphone is still on, that just takes you out of it just, took me out of the flow of the video, which is I think it's a good example of just the tinier, minute, trivial details that can just capture your attention for a split second and then bring the ego back into play, bring the pride back into play, bring the earthly existence back into play, and you lose the divine connection you had with the higher. And I don't mean to speak in, you know, wholly metaphysical terms, but they are metaphysical things that I think if you spend enough time alone and you spend enough time in deep thought, you realize there's structure to these things and there is something there. And it's not, woohoo stuff. It's real stuff, and it's deep stuff, and it's profound. And if you want to do anything in the creative pursuit, if you want to come to know yourself better, if you want to grow intellectually, if you want to be wiser, you would do well to tune into this voice and drop your pride and drop your ego. For pride is the enemy of wisdom, and ego is killer of the self.